My aunt smiled while the notary stamped away my future, and I understood what betrayal looked like when it wore pearls. My name is Marin Keating, and I grew up inside a small greenhouse with a crooked porch and a shy magnolia tree. The house belonged to my grandmother, Ruth, who taught me how to thread a needle, fold a fitted sheet, and speak softly when I wanted to be heard. She called the little place the harbor, and for most of my childhood, it was exactly that. My aunt, Lila, lived across town, arriving for birthdays and loud opinions, leaving with centerpieces and leftovers. She said she hated peeling paint. She said the house was a burden. Then the day after the funeral, she decided it was hers. It happened in the county office, fluorescent and indifferent. Lila's heels tapped a brisk metronome while I clutched a folder of school certificates and photographs, as if the past might weigh enough to matter. The clerk asked if I had an appointment. I didn't. Lila did. She produced papers with tidy paragraphs and a notarized signature dated 2 months before Grandma died. A revised will, she said, lips bright, tone gentle. In it, she was executor and sole heir. She glanced at me the way people look at pigeons on a railing, harmless and in the way. The clerk handed her a stack of forms, stamped in blue. Lila rested a manicured hand on my arm and said, "It's what Mom wanted, Marin. You'll understand once you're older. I am 34, older than the magnolia and twice as stubborn." Still, I said nothing. Her hand was warm, and mine shook. We stood in the echo of an old argument that had never been spoken: who loved Ruth more, who deserved her gratitude, who had been present when presence counted. Grandma had promised the house to me 100 gentle times, over tea and mending, but promises spoken in kitchens do not survive fluorescent light. I watched a stranger slide the papers into a scanner, and felt the harbor drift from its mooring. When we left, Lila insisted on driving me back to the house. She adjusted the rearview mirror, checking her lipstick. "I'll have a contractor look at the porch," she said. "Insurance will be a nightmare until we fix the rail. It's a lot to manage." "Grandma paid the insurance," I murmured. "Not anymore," she said, and tightened her seatbelt like a period at the end of a sentence. We pulled up to the green paint and the wavering magnolia. Lila's smile softened, almost kind. "You can stay through the weekend," she said. "Collect yourself, take time. I'll change the locks next week, after probate. We'll figure out your things." My things. As if the walls weren't mine, as if the porch hadn't memorized the shape of my feet. I took my keys from my pocket, their weight suddenly theatrical, and set them on the wooden rail. She watched. A small triumph sparked in her eyes, perhaps relief at my quietness, perhaps victory. I slept that night in Grandma's room, the one that smelled like lavender and hand cream. The house breathed the way it always had, but something felt leaned, as if a heavy box sat on one side of a scale. The moon chalked the floorboards, and I listened to the magnolia shift against the siding. When the sun came through the thin curtains, the grief was steadier, like a slow tide. I made tea in Grandma's dented kettle. The clock above the sink was 3 minutes fast, the way she liked it. The little lies we tell ourselves to stay on time. I stood on the porch, holding the mug close, and the wind lifted the edges of a yellowed flyer tacked to the post. Underneath, the old wood showed a faint rectangle where something had once been nailed and removed. That was the first spark. Something had been here, recently. Something mattered enough to be taken down. The week became a narrow corridor of errands and silences, each hour instructing me to move out of my own life. Lila called every morning, voice syrupy, asking if I had boxes, if I had places to go, if I had considered the reality. Each time, I said I was packing, and each time I placed nothing in a box. Neighbors came by with casseroles for grief that no longer had a body. Mrs. Price from next door left a blueberry pie on the stoop and squeezed my shoulder like a hinge that needed oil. "Your grandmother kept her promises," she said, as if the sentence could unspool into a deed. I wanted to ask her what she knew, or what she suspected, but I only thanked her and carried the pie inside. At night, I scrolled through tenant listings and short-term rooms, a grid of beige carpets and the faint smell of strangers. My job at the clinic paid enough for rent in theory, but my heart insisted on a mortgage paid in memories. Coworkers asked how I was doing, and I said, fine, in the way people do when their nerves are stripped to wire. Lila moved quicker than grief. A letter arrived from her lawyer, typed on thick paper, advising me of the probate timeline. It called me, interested person, which I read as, interference. There was a line about removing any property not memorialized in a ledger, a phrase that made my hands cold. Grandma kept lists in a dozen small notebooks, but none that an attorney would call a ledger. I could hear Lila's voice behind it, disinfecting what was human, turning it into inventory. On Thursday, I found the porch rail free of nails, the faint rectangle cleaner, as if someone had scrubbed it. I held my breath and traced the square with one finger. Something had been posted here. A notice. A letter. The thought entered quietly, and then refused to leave. My grandmother sent letters by registered mail when she worried the world might pretend not to hear. She had taped receipts to doors when forgetful neighbors owed her $20 for crochet classes. She believed in proof, and proof left a mark. I went to the county website that night, scrolling through unfamiliar terms. Transfer on death deeds, affidavit of heirship, codicil, witnessed signatures. Each phrase was a door, some locked, some ajar. I watched videos with kind librarians explaining land records, then called the clerk's office and listened to menus like a slow sermon. Do you maintain a public index for notices posted on private residences? I asked when a human finally answered. No, the woman said, patient. But we do keep records of deeds, wills, and liens. Are you searching for a specific instrument? Instrument. The word felt surgical. A will, I said. Or a deed relating to 218 Rosemont. You can search the kiosk here at the office, she said. We open at 8. I went the next morning before work, wore my clinic scrubs to feel like someone with a purpose. The kiosk was a metal cabinet with a blinking cursor, and the names on the screen belonged to strangers who had once lived a few inches beneath their roofs. I typed Ruth Keating. Documents bloomed like slow flowers. 2 older deeds, a mortgage satisfied 15 years ago, a will from 12 years back bequeathing the residence known as the Harbor to me, and then, 2 months before she died, a new will, the one I had already seen, that drained the color from the screen. At the bottom of the old will was a note, see letter of intent attached. My hands prickled. There was no attachment in the scan. I asked the clerk if the attachment existed. If it wasn't recorded, it wouldn't be here, she said. Sometimes people keep letters with their papers. At home, I opened drawers, cookie tins, the hollow space behind the old range. I shook a winter boot and found a grocery list. I checked the sewing machine's little drawer and found a pack of needles and a penny folded inside wax paper. The house held its breath as I searched, quiet and almost embarrassed. By midnight, I had a stack of ordinary life and nothing sharper. I stood in the doorway and looked out at the magnolia, bare branches scribing patient lines in the sky. Lila's lights were orange blocks across town, the color of insistence. I felt something I had not allowed myself yet, small and stubborn as that penny wrapped in wax paper. I would not surrender what had been promised with clean hands and a steady voice. I did not know how. I only knew the beginning of a vow, simple and absolute, like a seed under frost. The ally arrived disguised as routine. Mrs. Price knocked at 10 with 2 mugs of coffee and a stiff envelope tucked under her arm. Found this in my mailbox, she said. Meant to tell you sooner, but grief tangles the days. The envelope was addressed to Grandma, postmarked 3 months before she passed, from a small law office across town, Soren Hale, attorney. The return had been stamped, forwarding order expired, then redelivered to our street because the carriers knew the house and its habits. My name sat under Grandma's on the second line, handwritten, as if someone anticipated that the letter might be orphaned. Inside was a polite letter on thin paper. Mr. Hale's secretary wrote that Ruth Keating had scheduled a consultation regarding estate planning preferences, and that a draft transfer on death deed had been prepared for her review, naming me as beneficiary of the house. The last paragraph advised that the deed would not be effective unless recorded, and invited Ruth to return to execute the document and complete recording. Paper-clipped behind it was a photocopy of the draft deed, with Grandma's neat initials on each page. My throat tightened. Initials are a kind of whisper. They are something between intent and action, the place where people show they mean to go forward. Do you know this attorney? I asked. Mrs. Price nodded. He's quiet, fair, and kind to his mother. Ruth liked that. She left me the letter and her belief, both warm in my hands. The next morning, I called Hale's office and tried to borrow calm. I'm Marin Keating, I said. You sent a letter to my grandmother. A pause, then a careful voice. I remember Ruth, he said. She brought oatmeal cookies to the consultation. I told him about the revised will, about Lila's swift heels and slow sympathy. I kept judgment out of my sentences because I had learned how quickly it discredits the speaker. He listened in the way some people listen, with silence that isn't empty. Ruth was clear with me, he said softly. She wanted the house to pass to you outside probate, so no one could make a mess. She didn't come back to sign. She called once, said she was tired. People think there's always another week. Did she mention changing her will? I asked. No, he said. But that doesn't mean she didn't. Families are weather. You can read the forecast and still get rained on. He offered to meet. I sat in his tidy office later that afternoon, my scrubs flecked with heartbreak and coffee. He wore a gray suit that looked like he had owned it for a decade on purpose. On his desk sat the original draft deed and a note in Grandma's hand, 3 sentences, record this for Marin. The house is her harbor. If anyone argues, tell them I cooked their meals. The lines were steady, a small joke at the end like a folded napkin. Without her signature, the deed can't stand, he said. But this letter and the earlier will tell a story. Combined with your possession of the property, her statements to witnesses, we could challenge the later will if there are irregularities. I thought of Lila's certainty, the notarized stamp, the way the ink had settled into the page like a fact. Irregularities. I repeated. He opened the revised will and pointed to the witness lines. These names, he said, I recognize one. She is Lila's hairstylist. Not a disqualifier, but interesting. We'd need to check the circumstances, the notary's journal, the dates. Proof breathes when you give it room. Mr. Hale sent a request for the notary's log. He also searched the recorder's index for recent filings. 2 entries brightened on the screen. The revised will, of course, filed promptly. And a pending notice of sale from Lila to a small developer, set to close in 2 weeks. He looked at me not with pity, but with practicality. If she sells, recovery gets complicated. We can file a lease pendens to cloud the title while we investigate. Judges dislike family squabbles, but they dislike forged intentions more. I felt something align inside me, like a picture finally straight on a wall. Do it, I said. He drafted the motion while I sat quietly, studying the note in Grandma's hand. The pen pressure dipped only once, on the word harbor. I imagined her pausing, perhaps to sip tea, perhaps to steady the words she had said to me so many times. I copied the note onto my own paper, each letter an apprenticeship. 2 days later, the court clerk stamped our notice. The cloud settled over the title with bureaucratic grace. The developer's escrow agent called Lila, and Lila called me, her voice brittle. "What have you done?" she asked. "Asked for time," I said. She laughed once, sharp. "You're playing with things you don't understand." I looked through the window at the magnolia, small birds stitching air. "I understand a harbor," I said. "And I understand my name on a note." Mr. Hale's paralegal found more. The notary's journal showed the revised will was signed at Lila's hair salon, on a busy Saturday, between a color and a keratin treatment. One witness had not been present for the signature, only later for a handshake. The notary admitted memory was fuzzy. Proof was not a hammer, but it was a level. The lines began to wobble. We set a hearing. The judge was known for patience and a distaste for drama. Mr. Hale prepared me for modest expectations, called our strategy, quiet law. I liked the phrase. It felt like Grandma's voice lowered to say something true. I did not sleep the night before the hearing. I ironed my blouse, rethreaded a missing button on my cuff, and laid the old will on the table beside the note and the draft deed. Proof objects, modest and domestic, like everything Ruth used to love. When morning came, the sky was the color of paper. I picked up the envelope, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt ready to speak out loud. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and varnish. Two bailiffs leaned against the wall like punctuation. Lila arrived in a cinnamon coat, hair glossy, expression primed for sympathy. She touched my elbow as if we were a duet. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "We can settle it over lunch." Mr. Hale shook her attorney's hand. Words like stipulate and continuance floated between them, polite as napkins. We were called to the small courtroom where the judge sat beneath a state seal and a clock set exactly to the second. He asked for brevity, and he got it. Mr. Hale spoke first. He was not eloquent, which is to say he was perfect. He laid out the facts, Ruth's long-standing intent to leave the house to me, the earlier will, the planned transfer on death deed, the note in her hand, my uninterrupted residence, the sudden revision executed at a salon, the notary's shaky recollection, the scheduled sale. He did not accuse. He simply aligned the picture frames on the wall until the angle became noticeable. Lila's attorney rose and described her as the dutiful daughter, the one who arranged palliative care, the one who paid for the funeral flowers. He suggested that elderly people change their minds, that handwritten notes are memories pretending to be law. He said the revised will was valid on its face, and that I was grieving too hard to see the truth. The judge asked two questions. "Were both witnesses present at the time of execution?" he said, looking at the salon schedule. "Were all signatures acknowledged before the notary?" The answers threaded to uncertainty. The judge exhaled. "I am not making a final ruling today," he said, "but I find enough irregularity to maintain the lease pendens and appoint a neutral administrator to review the estate's intent. The attempted sale is stayed. Possession remains with Ms. Keating pending resolution." Lila's chin tightened. Her attorney whispered, and she nodded twice, a small metronome of discontent. I felt no triumph, only a weight shift inside my chest, like a book returned to its shelf. The neutral administrator, chosen from a list older than the courthouse, met us 5 days later in a conference room that pages had warmed for decades. She was precise, widowed, and kind. She had sifted our documents, spoken with neighbors, read the notary's journal, and taken 2 phone statements from Grandma's quilting circle. Her conclusion was narrow, careful, and clear. Ruth Keating intended to transfer the house to her granddaughter, Marin Keating, she said. The revised will is compromised by execution irregularities. The earlier will stands, with priority to the bequest of the residents. I recommend the court issue an order quieting title in Ms. Keating and removing Ms. Lila Bennett as personal representative with respect to the house. The judge adopted her recommendation the following week. There was no applause, only a wooden gavel that sounded like a drawer closing. The clerk prepared the order and a personal representative's deed conveying title from the estate to me. We scheduled the signing at the title office downtown, a place of ferns and framed maps. Lila arrived anyway, uninvited. She stood beside the glass door, watching me sign, watching the notary's stamp press down like a seal over water. She did not speak at first. She watched the pen move, then the stamp, then the way the notary slid the deed onto the blotter. Her voice when it came was small. "Mom told me she wanted you to be safe," she said. "I thought selling would free us both." I did not look up until the last page. "Safety is not a check you can write," I said, calm as the chair beneath me. Mr. Hale gathered the papers. The notary smiled once, administrative and sweet. Lila's mouth opened, then closed, then arranged itself into the expression she wore when someone missed her point. "You've humiliated me," she said, quiet as weather. I didn't speak a word, I replied. The house did. The courier left with a copy for recording. The ferns rustled when the door whooshed. Lila reached for the deed as if it might leap back into her hand. It did not. She met my eyes, expecting triumph there, or reproach. I had neither available. Only stillness. Justice is sometimes an empty chair no one sits in. We walked out together into the square. The magnolia buds along our street would open in a week. She paused at the curb, searching for something generous to say, or cruel, I could not tell. The silence drew a boundary around us both. "I'll send for my things," she said finally. "I boxed them," I said. "They're on the porch." She flinched at the word. Porch meant our mother's hands, the chipped rail, the shape of a life. She nodded once, gathered her coat, and went. The title clerk called me back to sign one more acknowledgement. The pen felt lighter than it had all month. When we finished, the notary slid the fresh record number across the desk. It looked like a coordinate one could navigate by. I stepped out into the thin sun. The harbor was waiting, quiet as ever, faithful as names written in small careful letters on thin paper. A week later, morning came in through the lace curtains like a slow apology. I opened every window and let the house breathe. Dust floated, forgiving as snowfall. The magnolia outside held its buds like thoughts it would soon say out loud. I made oatmeal the way Grandma preferred, with salt and a spoonful of cream, and ate it standing at the sink, watching blue jays argue with Grace. Work at the clinic steadied me. I took blood pressures, changed dressings, signed my name in boxes that meant something and nothing. Each evening, I returned to the greenhouse and fixed one small thing. I tightened a hinge on the pantry. I reseated a loose baluster on the staircase. I painted the porch rail the color of unsaid things. In the shed, I found the sign that had once hung on that rail, wrapped in a trash bag against the rain. It was a stiff manila folder tacked to thin plywood, the edges nicked. Inside, Grandma had taped the draft deed letter from Mr. Hale and a note to the mail carrier. "Please hold for Marin if not delivered by Friday. Proof leaves shapes even when you take it down." I saved the folder, slid it into a drawer, and sat for a long time at the kitchen table, feeling the house hum around me. People came by, not to gawk, but to bless in practical ways. Mrs. Price brought lemon oil for the wood. The mail carrier, who had known Ruth's handwriting for years, told me which days the porch swallowed packages. Mr. Hale stopped in once with a copy of the recorded deed, embossed and unadorned, the title now resting in my name with the quiet authority of a speech Grandma no longer had to give. Lila did not come back. She sent a short text with an address, and I had her boxes delivered. Inside them, between sweaters and a photo of her first apartment, I found Grandma's church fan, a paper circle printed with a blue sky and a wheat field. I set it on the mantel because it belonged to the house, not to either of us. Some things carry the room better than they carry a person. I planted tomatoes in the small garden bed by the porch steps. My hands dug into the earth that Ruth had loosened every spring for longer than I had been alive. The rhythm of the work created a silence that did not accuse. Birds stitched lines between the magnolia and the fence. I whispered thank you without ceremony. The tomatoes did not respond. Plants accept gratitude by growing. On Sunday, I drove to the cemetery with a thermos of tea and read the court order aloud at Ruth's headstone. It felt childish and perfectly right. We did not shout, I told her. We just kept placing the truth where people had to see it. The wind listened. A boy on a bicycle passed by with his mother, and the air held the polite distance of strangers being kind. Neighbors ask sometimes if Lila and I will reconcile. I say that family is not a pear you can ripen by putting it in a paper bag. Timing matters, and warmth, and intention. For now, we are two women who love the same person in different languages. We have set down the argument, not because we agree, but because an old house cannot carry endless conversation without sagging. In the evenings, I sit on the porch steps with a book and a pencil. The sky above the street gathers blue as if folding a quilt. Inside, the clock is still 3 minutes fast, and I do not change it. I like the fiction that the house and I are early for what comes next. Sometimes I picture the title office again, the deed sliding under my pen, the seal pressing down like a hand resting on a shoulder. I think about justice as something that sounds like a gavel, but more often looks like a garden you keep weeding, a hinge you oil, a light you turn off at night because you finally feel at home. Quiet revenge is not silence, it is a choice to let the facts speak in the tone of work, and to answer in kind. The harbor holds. Paint peels in dignified strips. The magnolia opens, patient and true. If my aunt drives by, she will see the porch rail shining. She will see the fan on the mantel through the window. She will know, without any sharp words, that the house kept its promise, and so did I. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.